is really meant to keep it at a 30,000 foot level when we talk about the budget and the challenges that currently exist in what we're calling right-sizing City Hall, making sure that we're only spending what we're actually bringing in. And then the idea is to answer questions that you might have, and then two, hopefully get some ideas that you might have on how we can begin to address this issue. As you know, the city's budget cycle, or may not know, begins in the spring. There's a traditional format where the City Finance Committee will consider how to formulate a budget, and then they'll present that budget to the City Council for adoption. This year, we're going to try and get some proposed solutions up earlier because of the fact that we're going to have to begin to reduce the actual costs of government so that the public can really weigh in, and we'd have an opportunity to answer or modify based on public input as we go forward. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to see this, but it'll give me some talking points. So there's a couple of things when we talk about the city's budget. The total budget is about $340 million a year. That's made up of the water company, it's made up of wastewater, it's made up of solid waste, and then it's made up of what we're calling general services. And the general services is really where we want to focus on, because when you think of the water and wastewater and the solid waste component to city government, those are rate-based services. So we receive a fee in exchange for the service, and those agencies are fine. They're not operating in any deficits, and of course, as you guys have seen, the water has accumulated a budget surplus of about $88 to $90 million, and I can explain when we get into more of the question and answer why that happened and why it may not continue to exist because of the use of the new smart meters that are in place. So when you think about just the general services, think of fire, police, recreation centers, senior centers, libraries. Those are the areas that the city council really gets to have some discretion over how much that we want to fund. Over the course of the last 20 to 30 years, there was, as all of you know, Santa Fe has had high property values, and the council has made a policy decision over the course of time, multiple councils have, to keep property tax rates low so that you don't have to charge people so much money, and to use gross receipts as a vehicle to generate revenues for the city. That made a lot of sense when we had lots of tourism coming into the town, when we had a lot of construction coming into the town. The city was able to actually fulfill its service needs in these areas and expand quite a bit its service because of the amount of gross receipts revenues that were coming in. So for the purpose of tonight, we're going to stay focused just on the general services, that discretionary money that from a policy standpoint, we make decisions and where our deficit exists. We're not going to really focus on the water utility, although we can answer questions about it, and Chris chairs our utility committee, and our wastewater and our solid waste, because those parts of government are funded properly. The deficit is sitting in the general services area. So what got us here is I said we were very dependent on gross receipts revenues. There are multiple forms of revenues that the city gets, gross receipts being one, property tax revenues being another, special fees like permit fees and other types of fees we generate revenues from as well. But when you think about general services, more than 73 to 75% of our budget is funded through gross receipts revenues. Very little is funded through property taxes. Because again, that policy decision to keep property rates very low because of the high cost of property taxes. If you looked at the structure in Albuquerque, it's almost inverse. Albuquerque's property tax rates are very high, and their gross receipts tax levels are low. And in an environment where you have a swing in the recession, property values tend to stay a little bit more stable than what your gross receipts revenues are. And so we were heavily dependent on gross receipts revenue for the city revenue. There's another issue that we deal with, and that's the issue of part-time residences. Between 42 to 4,400 homes are occupied by people who live out of state. There's a strong likelihood that they're not living here 12 months out of the year. So when you have a city budget that is largely put into place to use gross receipts revenues, you need people in your town spending money on a daily basis. When you think of the individuals who have who live in those homes, that 4,200 to 4,400, they get delivered a service as if they lived here 12 months out of the year. Meaning we're always going to have police ready to respond. We'll always have fire, EMT. We're always going to have recreation centers and parks and libraries that are in place as if they were living here. But we only get the benefit of them living here when they're actually living here, like all the rest of us, because they're in the town and they're spending money on gross receipts revenues. So right now, because we have those second homes, that does cause an issue with the amount of services that we're providing. And then, of course, you know, there is a challenge because the state controls what happens at the local level when it comes to tax policy. And one of those policy decisions put us right in this predicament. When Governor Richardson was the governor, they made a deal with municipalities saying that if you support us doing a tax exemption on food and medicine, we will make sure that the revenues that you're losing will be paid to you by the state coffers. And so that deal was made. And the reason they had to do that is because the state legislature controls our sales tax structure. They give us some components to raise and to decrease, but they get to largely control what happens with our gross receipts tax because we're tied to them. When you go to pay for a good, it's 8.6%, somewhere around there. The city gets about 5%, the state gets the rest. So what, or is it 3? It's about 3, and maybe it's opposite, right? So the state gets the 5 and we get the 3.5. Maybe it's wishful thinking on my part, but it's very tied together. We're tied at the hip with them. So 2 years ago, there was a tax deal done by the governor and the legislature to do a corporate tax cut, and to pay for that corporate tax cut, they took the money that was going to cities and counties that was holding them harmless, and they took it away. And they basically said, we're gonna do a 10-year phase out from paying this to you, and we're gonna keep it ourselves so we can pay for this corporate tax cut because we think that's gonna create jobs. We don't have to discuss the politics of it, but what that meant to the cities is that the promise that we made to you were taken away, so now you have to figure out how to fund this gap that's going to grow over the course of time, and over the course of 10 years, it's about a $15 million gap if you just look at today and where we'll be 10 years from now in the actual check that we were getting from the state. But, you know, don't worry too much because we'll let you raise gross receipts taxes to help cover the offset in your loss of revenues. Well, that didn't put us in a very good situation. Gross receipts tax, we know, is the most regressive tax that exists. They basically were saying, go ahead and do it and charge a gross receipts tax to the working people in your community, the people that live there, to offset whatever we promised. But, you know, and included in that, I think they did allow for us to consider reinstatement of a food tax, but that's this policy that we don't want to pursue. So we're heavily committed with the state, and we're trying to find legislation that will decouple us. We'll let them do their own tax policy, and then let us, as a city, do our own tax policy. But that's a bit of a ways. Next one. So here's what further compounds the issue. When you measure the gross domestic product of our community, and gross domestic product is that total economic churn that we have, more than 50% of that gross domestic product is driven by government and real estate. So when you think of sales of homes, that goes into it. When you think of new construction, whenever that happens, that goes into it. When you think of state, city, and county government, that's what make this up. Those are all areas where we don't get a GRT benefit. So we have an economy where the majority of the activity that's taking place does not generate gross receipts taxes. Where we actually do generate lots of gross receipts taxes is in the area of hotel, food, arts, entertainment, professional and business services, and retail. But that's a very small portion of our actual gross domestic product. So I think it's, Matt, let's see what the next one is. So when you look at when we were doing really well during the last 20 to 25 years, we were doing really well in the area of retail and lodging and food spend. That was going really well, and construction. Think of all the spend that was happening in Las Campanas as that was growing, the East Side Homes, Rancho Viejo. Those construction dollars stayed in our community. They were spending money. They were doing what they were supposed to do and generating a lot of GRT revenues. Well, when our recession hit, that was the first place that collapsed. People stopped traveling to Santa Fe the way they used to. The construction economy almost completely died. And we were stuck funding a government at a certain level. So when the government had to do its annual budgeting, the only way that we could make up the shortfall was to go into some of the reserves and to begin to develop these bridging strategies. So right now we basically have a tax structure that generates revenues that are largely dependent on tourism dollars that are coming into the community, film dollars that are coming in. But we have some things working against us, right? We have the hold harmless that's going away. We've lost our construction industry. The majority of our gross domestic product is made up in areas that we don't generate GRT revenue. And so now the council has to figure out, how do we go forward, given this reality? And how do we begin to stop the bridging strategies that funded government at a certain level so that we wouldn't have to either see a reduction in force or see a reduction in service? And that's been what the council has been trying to hold on to. Next one. So right now we generate about $89 million in true revenue, right? So this is revenue that just comes in that is discretionary, if you will. We actually generate a lot more in gross receipts taxes and in property taxes, but those are committed to paying for existing bonds and debt that might be out there. But the amount that we actually get to work with is about $89 million a year. So 62% coming out of gross receipts taxes, about 32% in fees, charges, and miscellaneous, small percentage in property tax, and then the rest is coming from reserves, and that's water money, and it's in shifting revenues that were set up to be dedicated to fulfill a function and not performing that function and using it to cover the gap. For example, we have a stormwater GRT tax that's set up and it generates revenue on an annual basis. It's meant to fund investments in stormwater, but we've had to use that to pay for some of the FTEs that are at City Hall. We have a CIP program that every 2 years generates about $18 million worth of funds. We've only put half of that into CIP work, and CIP means capital improvement projects. Think streets, think facilities. And the other half we put into paying for salaries of employees. So there's this bridging strategy that we were trying to have in place so that we wouldn't see a reduction in services. But that meant that we were taking revenues that could go into other programs, and we were using it to basically fund general fund operations. So when you hear us talk about a $15 million deficit, that $15 million deficit is really what it's costing us to serve the public in offering general services and the amount of these true revenues that are coming in. So here's how we spend About $104 million in general service or in government services money. That's that money that we collect in gross receipt plus the bridging and the reserves that we use. 46 goes into public safety, police, fire, EMT services, about 36% into quality of life. That includes Genoveva Chavez, Mary Esther Gonzalez, parks, about 67 parks, 300 miles worth of trails. I believe we have 3 full-time libraries, and 4, I believe, senior centers that are throughout the city. So those are what we call quality of life, and that funds about 36%. The administration, about 10%. That's City Hall, that's accounting, legal, all those things. It's about 10%. And then Public Works, which is really a number that we have to work on expanding, has only been about 8%. Streets is the big amount that's in there. It does not include water. It does not include garbage, but it's mostly streets and stormwater issues that we have. Also facilities. Lights, all of those areas that we're responsible for from an infrastructure standpoint that is not water or wastewater. So that includes airport. Transportation is inside this Public Works. A trash pickup is not in this one. Right. This is just the general services. It's not the overall one. So this is meant how much we have basically for discretionary. That's clearing this, yes, you're exactly right. That's potholes, right? That's good sidewalks that are crumbling, that aren't meeting ADA standards. Those are all areas that we have to cover with those funds. Yes, correct. But there's a number out there that I think is in excess of $200 million of deferred maintenance when you take into account how much work needs to be done on our streets, our facilities, our sidewalks. It's just backed up over time, and we have to figure out a program how to start investing money into the upgrades that are critical. When you think about our facilities, the majority of the facilities that we're in are highly inefficient, so the cost of electricity and just general efficiencies are higher because we haven't been able to invest properly in our facilities. One good thing that the city did do in this area is 25% of our city facilities, the electricity, is generated through renewable energy. So they have helped in making sure that we offset some of those costs. But this is generally this is an important number for all of you because we want to start getting feedback, right? Because part of what the council has to start considering is not only do we have to figure out how to live within our means, we have to make sure that the priorities are set right, that these priorities match to what the public feels are the areas that we should focus on. So part of the options that our finance department has presented to the city council for us to think about is, one, we have to make sure that we're able to identify both short and long-term improvements for efficiency. Right now we have a very outdated accounting system. For those of you who have been in the financial world, there are many high-performing governments that have a software system where you can generate reports in real time to know where you are you tracking to your budget, what's going on. We've got a great staff, but they have to spend a lot of time in Excel spreadsheets, building Excel spreadsheets, and then importing those Excel spreadsheets into our system. So it's highly antiquated and not efficient in any way. So when we get data, sometimes the data is very late, or it's not necessarily in real time. It requires a lot of human power to just generate some of the reports so that we really kind of understand what's going on at any given point. So we have to find ways to create efficiencies. We have to figure out how can we stay delivering service levels at what the public expects, but maybe not with the same level of manpower or facilities. Do we actually look and consider to reduce services? Do we look at increasing revenues? And part of my plan to increase revenues obviously is to grow the economy, because the more people that are working in Santa Fe, the more people are spending money, especially if they have good jobs. The council does have options to raise taxes, but they have exercised a lot of restraint from doing so, I think for a couple of reasons. One, there's the ability in the property tax mill rate to go up 3 mills. And there's about an eighth left in a gross receipts tax. They could implement all of that tomorrow, and your service level wouldn't increase one bit. It would barely be sufficient to cover the deficit that exists in place. But what that would do to you most immediately is it would quadruple the size of your city property tax bill, and it would increase the amount of the GRT tax that you're having to pay. So that isn't very palatable to any of the members of the governing body. But what it is how do we begin to think through reducing the costs, and doing so over a short period of time, so that we don't inflict a lot of shock into the system, meaning you don't just start a new fiscal year $15 million less than what you started, but that you have a gradual shift to this right size. And it also means that the city needs to, when we tighten our belt, need to find better and smarter ways of delivering service to the public in ways that meet the expectations of the community. So I think that, so what we need from the public, and I'm not sure if we got the next part of it, what we need from the public is we need feedback on priorities. When you think about a citizen of Santa Fe and what matters to you, you know, I think those are obvious questions, but it's important that we get the feedback from you. We need to understand what level of service that you fully expect. And we have to make sure that we are able to show the public what we're going to do to tighten our own belt and get our own house in order. On those points, the Parks Bond audit will be finished by the middle of February. So that'll be done before the council considers this budget. I have every reason to believe that the audit will come back showing that money was spent where it was supposed to be spent, but that there was a breakdown of internal controls over what the council approved in terms of what type of park spending should take place, and then what actually happened when Parks and Recreation started making the program investments at each of the parks. So that'll come out right around the time that the council really starts delving into this. I guess before I ask questions, I don't know if Sig and Chris, did you want to add any more to kind of the complexity of this issue?
I think that the mayor covered this. I mean, none of the options or anything that anybody's looking forward to, but I think that some of the things that have been discussed, and being taken out of the water fund, and certainly this was not a policy that came from the mayor. It's something that we've been doing for a number of years. And you know, it's kind of one of those things where when we started talking about it and looking at it, certainly I don't think anybody was excited to have it continue. But it's also a very, very tough thing in a recession. I think that the previous administration and councilors made those decisions so that they didn't have to make some decisions that probably, to just put it very bluntly, had to do with laying a lot of people off. They were trying to keep people in their jobs. And as much as I sympathize with that, I think some hard decisions, the can was put pretty far down the road, and it's in our lap right now. And we do have hard decisions to make. And I think that we'll have decisions that are tough, and some people will be very unhappy with them. I don't think anybody's excited about cutting services, and I was excited about perhaps, some positions not being filled, and I don't think anybody's excited about increased taxes. But the numbers are what the numbers are, and we're gonna continue to spend, and we have to figure a way out of this, and it's either spend less or bring in more revenue.
I think the mayor did a great job with his presentation, and Councilman Bell, pretty much summed it up. I'm just here to listen to what you guys have to offer, see if we can come up with some creative ideas, creative solutions. And, I don't think anyone up here pretends to know everything, so we just want to be able to serve you the best way we possibly can, and listen to some of your ideas and solutions. We'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Chris. So, questions, it could include I know that a lot of the conversation has been about the water, fund, and we're all happy to answer questions on that, even if that isn't necessarily what's weighing into the decisions that are gonna be made. We're here to also answer questions on those as well. Yes?
Why are you including, you're talking about general services, and why are you looking at the overall budget, are you not looking at the other areas?
I think, so every area will be looked at for driving more efficiency and being smarter in how we're delivering service. But the deficit is happening in the general services that are being delivered to the public. And when you look at the costs of running the water utility and the wastewater utility and the solid waste, our rate structure matches what those costs are. So those aren't the areas that we have to most immediately focus on. We have to focus on the area that is causing the deficit.
Unless you can figure out not the solution in those areas, so you can bring your costs down, so they can give you some additional.
For the exception, that's what we've been doing, right? So that, I think that the public generally, at least what I've heard of, is they don't wanna see those rates deliver excess cash that's gonna go into funding some of the general government operations. That's basically the way we've been acting. The way the city has dealt with its budget is everything has gone into one pool, and then we basically have funded government based on a combination of revenues that are coming in one given year, and then pulling cash out of that pool that it's going in. So we've kind of been operating that way. And we're saying, no, we have to align services with the amount of revenues that are coming in, just from a sustainable standpoint.
Well, because you're taking funds and you go to invest into those areas.
Right.
And then, so you could reduce your costs in those areas, so you could still have funds available, but still make those investments. So would that be a simple option?
It is, I haven't heard it as necessarily being one that's palatable, because we're trying to move away from that now, where we're trying to actually take some of it.
That you get, the city as a DMP is paying for diesel, gas, gasoline, is paying for all the departments out of one sack, if you want.
It's basically the way we've been dealing, as opposed to making sure that revenues and expenses stay aligned in each of these functional areas.
Make one for each.
So the idea would be, and I think this is important from a transparency standpoint, and with the new ERP system we'll be able to do it, is that you'll be able to match the rate that you're being charged, whether it's for a gallon of water or for trash pickup, to the service that's being delivered. And right now, people believe that the rates that they are paying for a number of these areas are just going into funding other things that they don't really know about, and that's basically the way we've been creating these bridging strategies. Now, you pointed out an example where we can drive efficiencies to lower costs just because it's good business. You know, fire, police, solid waste vehicles, water vehicles, they all use gas, they all have maintenance requirements. It only makes sense to have a single shop that's able to provide service to all those entities, and rather than in every one of those shops have their own bays, their own credit cards for gas, their own, because there's not a lot of efficiency in that model, and that's part of one of the issues that we have to go to, is how do we combine multiple or duplicative services that are currently going on in city government into a centralized function so we can lower those costs and deliver that service internally better. Another example is lots of accounts payable and accounts receivable people that are in different departments doing the same function, because that's kind of the way their job duties were dealt with. And some of those lie in the form of administrative secretaries that are supporting department heads, or it's really kind of a mixed mash of how that's set up. Yes, sir.
While you're on that subject, it seems to a lot of us that the whole issue of priority that you brought up have been very poorly managed for a very long time. I mean, we've spent about millions of dollars in parking tickets, and
Mhm.
so we're spending probably the accounting system is obsolete and not very functional. I'm thinking, why isn't that high up on the top of the priority? You guys have a huge organization. It's like really high on the priorities would be things on accounting systems that are constantly updated, because that makes us more efficient. Then I see articles in the paper that say we have way more employees in the city and county government, at least the city government, compared to a lot of other cities.
Mhm.
So my observation that as we go forward, we really need to be open and confessional about, the priorities have not been met.
Right.
I remember I had a list of 200 looked at recreational fields, and I thought, holy cow, $35 million for a gym for a small percentage of the population. And I just thought to myself, maybe that is a top priority, but I wonder.
Right. Well, look, so I've been in office about 18 months, and I've tried not to do too much of this, trying to find that unless I was there, and not a lot of us that are there were when these early decisions started being made, but I think that it is true that an accounting system wasn't necessarily a big priority. The city for a long period of time had finance directors that were there for long periods. There's a guy by the name of David Senna that was there for many years. Then Catherine Raveling came in, and then there was this unstable environment of multiple finance directors. And when that happens, things tend to just shut down, and you're just covering things. This is all pre us coming in, and even when I came in, we had a hard time finding a director, but we have one now who is a former city manager and very much gets it and understands it. So investing in an accounting system so you can drive efficiency, be more transparent and more accountable is going to be a priority. We are pushing that issue. Addressing service deliveries on a FTE basis, making sure that as we go through and look at what departments have in terms of FTEs, and are they being fully utilized, and are they needed to meet the service, is being addressed as well. Being able to look at performance-based budgeting for the public, so that if we say our priorities are in public safety, that means that we want to reduce the loss of property values by X percent. We want to reduce violent offenses, all those things, and then have a budget that says this is how much we think it's going to cost us, and let's map ourselves to metrics. Those are things that a new accounting system and a new way of looking at our budget process will help create confidence in the public's eyes that we're actually delivering on a service that matches to the budget, and that really hasn't been done. What we've had to do is basically look at what last year's expenses were, and let's just make sure that we hold on to it and stay delivering this level of service, because we haven't necessarily had the tools on the inside to create that type of assessment. There are other things that Councilor Lindell is pushing, like making sure that whenever we have capital projects, that there are certified project managers who are bidding them properly and estimating them right, so that when things happen, or when money's starting to get spent, that there's the right kind of skill set that is bringing it in and bringing it home, right? So it's on time, on budget, and the quality is there. And they sit at levels of city government where they get to see change orders that come back because a lot of that wasn't done. So the council has, I think, a lot of information now where they could determine where we have to invest in key areas as priorities. And it's about staffing, it's about the quality of the staff, it's about processes that drive efficiency. And most importantly for all of us, having a way to look at how money's being spent in real time and see if it's actually going for the things that the city has said it needs to go for. But a lot of the stuff that you brought up are all things that we're dealing with. And keep in mind, so the council, you know, the council is focused on policy, not so much management. And I know, just from being an outsider looking in, the management has done a pretty good job of pushing council away from what's happening on the administrative side of things. It doesn't mean that they're doing anything bad, but there's been a separation between the policy and the actual administration, what's going on. What we're gonna see now is the council getting very deep into that because we have to repurpose our budget. We'll be successful when we come out of this knowing that we're a stronger government delivering better service at less cost. And the great thing is it's being done all over the world. I mean, there's lots of examples of governments that have gone through this, and there'll be some pain, but I think that we'll become stronger when we're matching our services with our revenues. Yes.
Yeah, I thought, let me start by saying I have no idea that this was a budget discussion.
Mm.
It's in no way my area of expertise or even particular interest. I do a radio show called the Juicy, which is about 2 hours at lunch. And I came because I thought this was about me and other stuff. So I have a couple of probably very naive questions to ask you
It's okay.
that are about county and finance. The cigarette tax and the liquor tax and this PNM, I have a lot of trouble with the amount of the PNM. And I'm curious about whether they contribute to the city and whether we also get the cigarette and the amount of DWI that we have in the liquor tax.
So I don't know the answer to the cigarette tax, but I believe we probably do get some revenues out of it. The liquor tax, the unfortunate thing is that the liquor tax goes to the state, and the state will keep 60+% of it to deal with whatever programs they have and release very little back into the communities. And that's legislatively, that is a way to twist it, but they haven't. So the state, when you think about us, you know, they've got their own set of issues, and they're going to hold on to as much of these revenues as they can. So it's a difficult environment to get that money back. But if it came back, it wouldn't go into general fund operations. Those would be monies that would go into behavioral health programs that would support people who are struggling. PNM pays a franchise fee like CenturyLink and other utilities that use city rights-of-ways. There's a fee in place, and you saw that kind of in that pie of fees and other income where we get franchise dollars, but it's not tied to the rates that they have in the city.
And Comcast,
Comcast does pay a franchise fee as well.
so is there any way of raising the revenue?
There is, but they won't be to levels of any real significance, and we try and keep up where the market is generally with those. Again, hoping that the cost of service stays low, that's ultimately delivered to our citizens. But they do have to pay to use city rights-of-ways and do business in the city.
So the only other thing that I would say, or any must be taken on, if they do raise property taxes, I didn't know it was an annual or a small amount. It's a pretty high property tax by each year. I'm hoping that there will be senior rates that are considerably lower. I would hope that that would be.
So two things. So keep in mind your property tax covers schools to county government to state, and then we get a small portion of it. I think to your point though, what we need to push for at the state legislative level are local exemptions, if you will. So other states and how they deal with creating higher property tax rates without hurting lower income individuals or fixed income is they have these exemptions that allow for your home, for the value of your home to be reduced by a certain amount so that your overall, you might have a high tax rate, but what you're paying is less because the exemption has reduced your property value. Today in the state, it's about $5,000 a year, and some of the states across on the other side of the country, on the East Coast, it can be up to $200,000 to $300,000 a year, where they actually lower property values, and then you have a higher tax rate on that. So that's why I'm saying the city is highly tied to the state when it comes to tax policy, and keeps us a little bit boxed in how we can solve some of these issues.
What's the payroll like, you have any numbers on that for the expense?
I don't, we have about 1,760 employees. Would you know what our salary number on our budget is and benefits? I- That's across, yeah. So it's about 1,760 employees across all spectrums. And generally those FTE plus benefit costs are in the 70+%. Right. So it's about of a $340 million budget, more or less. It's about 100 to 110 million. It's about a third of right. Yes, sir. I know that the manager and the administration is going to have to propose a series of in this effort to right size the number, they'll have to propose to the council the number of employees that are needed to fulfill some service level for the city. The city's not investing dollars into like a whole formalized structure. We think that our department heads need to take the first crack at what that would be. But part of being out here to hopefully get an idea of priorities will help us make sure that deals with the issue of employees that fill a certain function. But having said all that, it's a mix mash of what's going on in each of the departments. So it's very confusing, and it's kind of a real hornet's nest, but we have to get through it. So we may have some departments that have a lot more mid-level managers than other departments, and we have to just kind of see what those services are and does it make sense. There hasn't been a real consistent method for how the city has filled vacancies or what vacancies have gotten filled. So it's a long way of saying we don't know yet, but we know we have to get to a number that that right sizes, again, the government. And right now being at 1,760, keep in mind, when you see the comparisons to Rio Rancho and Las Cruces, they don't have bus transportation systems the way we do. But we also have a lot more recreation centers than what they have. We have more libraries, we have more senior centers, and so there's, you know, it's very difficult to go apples to apples with other cities in New Mexico because Santa Fe, I think, provides more service in more areas than what some of the others do. So we're going to have to find our way through that so that it becomes a little bit easier, but that's an unknown. So we're giving them the first shot, and if they don't, it's certainly going to be the council prerogative to deal with it. I think that it's something that we should expect from them. I've had very personal one-on-one conversations with the managers saying, look, I know this is hard for your departments to come forward with a budget, but Until they do, it makes it very difficult for the council to deliberate on policy. And they've got to deliver, right? There's no other option on this in terms of being able to come back and let us know what they need. If they come back and nothing has changed, and they're fully expected to get funding again, then we have to question whether they're the right people in the right jobs. And that's clearly the message that I've sent to the manager of, if they can't handle how to get through this level, then we need to seriously look at who can come in and deal with it, because we can't just accept the same old, expecting a different result magically appears. But we're gonna give them their first shot, before we deal with those issues.
I'd like you to
Yep.
clarify on one other thing. If I could just ask for that as well. When I was the fire chief, we were asked to do a 10% reduction in overall budget as well. So when we went through that process, 90% of our budget was personnel costs. So we started looking at where we were gonna get rid of people from. And what it meant was closing down the fire station. In the fire station, we were looking at closing it just in here because we were homeless, had just been staffed up. When we tried to do that, there was such overwhelming ridicule from the public that the council at that time decided, no, we don't want to be closing down the fire station. So that priority has to be set. And really, when you look, you can reduce people, but what services are you going to give up to do it? That's the hard part.
And-
The department directors are trying to do.
Right, and I will say this, and then I'll take your question, and Councilor Trujillo just joined us, but the wrong approach is to ask all of city government to reduce itself by 10, 15, 20%, because that just means everybody suffers. The opportunity here is to invest in areas that are priorities, and to feel like it's okay to pull back from areas that maybe aren't a priority, and I would put life and safety, right, and health at the top. So if we're talking about closing a fire station versus closing a senior center or a recreation center, those are very two different issues on the qualms of life, right? But to the neighborhoods who are very comfortable with a recreation center in their community, that becomes something that's very important. And those can be some of the debates and the challenges that we're gonna have as a governing body to prioritize where staffing is gonna stay, because you don't, the wrong exercise is to ask everyone to take a cut, to make everyone feel like they, just so we don't make any of the wrong painful decisions that we make everyone pay for, but the public ends up paying for that, because you see government completely reduced as opposed to seeing increases in areas that make sense. I'm sorry.
The other point you raised about property taxes, you said that you could increase it by $3, which would quadruple the property taxes.
It would quadruple the city's portion of your property tax.
Which represents what?
I don't know what the overall portion is, but we're we receive the least property tax in your overall rate. We get about $10 million a year, 10%, somewhere around there, of that general service, and about 6.5 goes towards obligated debt that we have. Are these mill rates? Yeah. So of a 23.36 mill rate, the city operation gets a 0.70. So it's pretty small on the operation side of what we would get, compared to Santa Fe County gets 7%, the schools get 6, 7, about 8%, the community college gets 3.6%.
Just in quick math, what you're talking about is tripling the cities, but that only increases the 10% or so.
It would be it would be a pretty small.
The 10% is a lot less.
But let me tell you what it does to you. But no. No, we would quadruple your actual tax payment. What it would mean to a home with about, to the city, right? To the city, right? Not in the grand total, right? Correct. So in the grand total, it won't be quadruple. It'll be something less. But if you have a $300,000 home in valuation, you could see property tax bill go significantly much higher. I mean, I don't know I know we had calculated, and I don't want to give you a number, but that number for the 300,000 to 500,000 square foot homes is significant of an increase. To the million plus homes, it may be pretty negligible. But I don't get a sense that that's immediately where the area needs to be long-term, so that we don't, when we hit another recession and we know they're all cyclical, the best balance to have would have a little bit more of city services funded by property tax, and keep that gross receipts tax low, because it's so regressive and hits working people pretty bad. So we do that. Yeah. It would, just the city portion of it, not your overall. Yes. That, I think that the county assessor has done that through new software that they've had into place over the last few years. They actually use satellite images that hover over the city, and they're mapping the pictures of those buildings to actual property records. So I do think that they've brought a lot more onto the tax roll. Oh, go ahead, real quick.
Just one thing that also to keep in mind too about our tax structure is property tax. A couple of years ago, when we last punched all those numbers, I think there might have been a couple of like sewer districts, might have done above us in one category or another, but we were number 2 next to Taos in 2 areas. We had the second highest GRT in the state of Illinois, and the second lowest
Property tax rate.
exactly, for the municipality alone, which means that we are taxing you very heavily when you're spending in the school. In terms of property rates, particularly, in some of our $1 million homes up in the hills, some of those folks who live here year round, some of them don't. But what we're keeping in mind is that we're letting a lot of wealth go untaxed, and we're taxing a lot of poor people hard.
Well, that's what we had said earlier, right? About when you have 4,200 homes owned by out-of-state residents, but they get 100% of the service. That service is the fire, the police. We're funding them largely through GRT, not so much through the property tax. I think that over the years the council made the right decision, because we didn't want to hurt low-income homeowners who saw property values go up. But that is the issue that we have today, that we have to, over the course of time, shift, right? Yes, sir. Oh yeah, they're taxed, but they're taxed at a very low rate. Because we've kept our property tax rates low, the council does not have the ability to say who gets taxed at what rates. So when we raise property taxes, we raise it on everybody. So they've kept property tax rates low so that they wouldn't necessarily hurt the homeowners, and we've relied on gross receipts taxes to pay for the cost of services. I'm sorry, you've had your... Right. Well, and I'm not proposing that as a solution. What I'm saying, long term, when the time is right, eventually we're going to have to have a little bit more balance if we, that way we don't run the risk of what happens in the next recession when things actually Oh, sure. But that won't, I don't see that happening in this budget fix. I could be wrong, but I think we want to try and find ways to lower the cost without having to increase property values. It does. It does. Especially because, look, we don't get any payment for the state being here, right? A lot of times there'll be a fee in lieu of, because they own a lot of properties in the city. The other thing is, look, the Rail Runner was wonderful, but it cost a lot of money. But there's a large percentage of the state and some city workforce and county workforce that take the Rail Runner in every day. They earn a living and they take their disposable dollars and they spend it where they live, which is in Rio Rancho, where the cost of housing has been more affordable, right? Much more lower. So their quality of life is higher because they get more money to basically support their families on. In Santa Fe, we only, of our workforce that lives here, only 39% lives of our workforce, only 39% lives in the city. And yet we have a structure set up that we need more working in, and we're gonna be considering how we can put more housing up on the market to keep workers here, because we want them to go to the restaurants and some, but not, but I think even if, let's say it was 50%, that's still a large amount of our workers that are moving to other communities where they're spending their money, right? Right. The, the anecdotal, well, not only I-25, if you had time to hang out between 7:30 and 8:30 both at the DOT and at the downtown, you will see that train unloading people, and then at the end of the day, it picks them up, it moves them back out. So, look, we need the workforce because the work is here. It brings in a whole other issue of how do we address our housing issue, which is become very disconnected from the average working person. So today, average wages are about $48,000. The average price of a house is $290,000, but you can only afford a $160,000 house, right? So there is a disconnect between what workers are earning, what the average price of a house is in Santa Fe. We're not alone in confronting this problem. There's a lot of affluent communities that are dealing with how you hold on to your workforce. Think of San Francisco in the most extreme. But we have that issue of holding on to our workforce, and that means trying to find housing here that makes sense, right, in the right locations. And that's where we get opportunities to talk about infill and high density. And the nice thing is that millennials and people entering the workforce aren't asking for quarter-acre lots anymore. They want smaller places. They want it walkable, and that gives us a great opportunity to do some exciting infill projects as we move forward. Yes?
How do you account for what it will cost to get to the locations in the cost of transfer?
Sure. Right now, the preliminary estimate is about $2 million to pay for the software and to implement it at a level where it's working appropriately. It's not small change, but when you think of what it can do for the level of accountability and transparency, it becomes something that is a very important tool in holding the public's trust. Yes? Mm-hmm. Sure. Right. Sure. Mm-hmm. So great. So So on the first question, hopefully a budget tool will be available by the end of the year that will allow the public to basically go in and play with the budget as it exists today. So it creates more tools to interact so that you can see what would happen if we reduced police by 20% and what would that mean. So it's if it delivers on what they've said it will deliver, it'll give you a very good tool to kind of go in there and see on your own what's going on. There's a lot of places for the city and the county to work together, right? We both have back office systems. We both have garage bays. We both have police forces and fire department forces. It becomes an issue, quite honestly, of political will. And I think that it exists, but right now both governments are kind of dealing with issues that are taking up energy and time to deal with. Hopefully in time, you know, we've talked to the county manager a whole bunch about having one centralized back office system. There, you know, someone who runs an accounts payable system at the city is doing the exact same function of a person who's doing accounts payable at the county. And if you had one person doing that for both entities, because of technology, you could reduce your costs. So those are areas that we've started to open up conversations on how to work with, but I don't want to discount the political forces that when you have two elected bodies that are independent, many times territory and revenue becomes an issue. We were very frustrated with the county because that tax that the state gave local governments to be able to recover their hold harmless, they instituted a gross receipts tax pretty quietly that generated about $4 million that all of you are going to be paying for as city residents, but it's going to go to fund, you know, county services, right? So that was an opportunity which we had asked them to say, hey, let's see how we can work together on and try and make it happen, that they decided they wanted to move sooner on. So it could be much better. I think that the entities as they stand, it's tough, but the individuals all have personal relationships with the county commissioners, but I think that it's a matter of us prioritizing what we're going to solve first, and that hasn't been on that level yet. And then benefits are about another 15 or 30, about 35 million. Yeah. Well, we got it. So our benefit package is very good for the employees. Is it normal? We probably have the better of most counties and cities across the state. We also live though in a very expensive area of the state, and I think that there has been some consideration given to providing a more robust. So rather than paying $35 as a copay or $50 in some cases, city employees were able to pay $10. Now I think it's $20 or $25. I think that was a nod by the council to try and keep benefits low because there were no pay raises that were given during this whole period of time that we were bridging strategies. If there were some, they were pretty small and they didn't keep up with inflation. So if you're a city employee, you've actually seen your purchasing power decrease over the last few years rather than stay up to where it should be. So it hasn't necessarily been the best working environment, and I think that from a compensation standpoint, so I think that the council looked to a generous benefit package to try and help compensate that. I do think it's all in play. I'm not saying that gets to be safe. Those are all areas that we look at, and this year we actually did, you know, we increased the amount of the amount that employees had to pay, and that lowered the cost of the benefit that the county was paying over, city was paying overall. Mm-hmm. A lot of our public employees across the board have really taken some big hits. Teachers make $30,000 a year to get started. Talking about trying to attract that kind of talent into Santa Fe when the cost of housing is high that has a real impact on our kids. That has an impact on poverty if we're not able to take care of them long term. So and on the retirement, right. So I think that, what we're talking about tonight is a budget fix, but there are much bigger places that our city needs to go to create a sustainable future for us, right? And to make sure we have more workers living here, that that the housing availability matches the types of jobs that are here, that we move away from having to be, our gross domestic product being in areas where we don't get taxes and move it into areas where we do get taxes. So film has been a big area that we've tried to focus on, developing an entrepreneurial economy for people to build businesses here. Those are all areas that the council has continuously said we want to move, but we're not going to get it overnight. So in the meantime, we have to correct our budget while we work towards those efforts. Yes.
We made a comment earlier that you're not the first governmental group to go through these challenges and whatnot. And you're right. I mean, the federal government started about 20 years ago. Started going through the same pains and whatnot. What they have found, and we keep talking about reduced services, and you're talking 1,700 employees, we're coming up with like $15 million, you're talking probably 200 FTE.
It's about 250 to 300. Yep.
And, you go from productivity levels and best commercial practices and whatnot, which do not exist in most governmental organizations, and can implement something like that, where your productivity can dramatically change. You can eliminate potentially 175 positions, or not fill them through attrition, not painfully, through attrition, and you get your $15 million.
Sure. It's
And I know that for a fact because that's what I do for a living. I run large, federal installations with hundreds and hundreds of people, and that's where the federal government has realized that by bringing in privatization, by bringing in best commercial practices, you can dramatically improve. I question the manager, what's going to be the toughest? That has managers sit there and say this plankton that I have built over years, is not loaded.
Well, and let me tell you why that's going to be a challenge.
Your biggest challenge.
Because these are the managers that have known this for several years, right? They know the numbers inside, and this is going to be a real come to Jesus between the council and the administration on, we're serious about, we've got to show this now. It's part of why we all made this issue very public, right? So that we can build the awareness and create the expectations of the public that there won't be as many FTEs in place. And you're right, attrition, early retirements. We have a large number of vacancy funded positions. There's ways that we can kind of ease our way in without trying to find or trying to experience too much pain. It's why I said this needs to be a multi-year strategy and not just a strategy we fix in 1 year, which means bridging strategies will have to continue for a little bit so that it doesn't become that, because we still have to fund the cost of government. But I think if we lay out the plan to the public and they know that there's a time period and we can hold ourselves accountable in hitting these benchmarks, then we'll build the trust that we're going to get there. And then ideally, it's not just about moving people off the payroll. It's about keeping people in areas that we know we need to serve, and going ahead and through efficiency and other means, removing people that don't necessarily need to fill these job functions any further. And that really is going to be the important leadership part that we're all going to have to play going forward. Maybe a couple more questions? Yes. Facilities, right.
do of this projected infrastructure
Yep.
stuff at some time, or when would that be used?
So, the number you have is correct, but it's not, there's not a debt obligation against it. It's basically unfunded deferred maintenance that exists in the city. We haven't found a revenue source to begin to attack it. And I know Councilor Maestas is gonna be proposing a gas tax increase to do some of that, and I'm opposed to that now for a number of reasons. But there is a deferred maintenance number that exists out there that's unfunded, and that means that deferred maintenance is not being addressed. So that's one issue. The second part about the transparency, for sure, that's why we're talking about a new accounting system that the public can actually go in and interface with and understand what the budget situation is at any given point. I had said before you come in that Councilor Lindell is pushing to make sure that projects that are issued by the city are overseen by certified project managers, so we have the right skill set that is overseeing some of these deferred maintenance, so you don't have change orders that blow up a project and bend it out of budget. So those are all things that we're all tooling up to do. The issue of priorities, what the administration has told the council, and part of why I think we're going through some of these listening sessions, is there has to be a sense of priorities in terms of service level deliveries that are given. And then the department heads, their job is to come back with the number of employees that they think are needed to meet that requirement. So the most obvious is police, right? It's the biggest budget in this general services area is police and fire. So, I would assume that many of us are gonna say, yes, we wanna make sure there's a police officer that is present and our firefighters can respond to an emergency call within 7 minutes, I think is what the access is. Then it comes down to the issue of libraries and rec centers and senior centers. And that's where it gets hard, where they say, okay, now tell us how many that you feel like you want, and we say we want all of them. That's not gonna work, because that's what contributes to this $15 million deficit, right? So those are hard conversations. I mean, I was with the librarian earlier. I mean, the library services are very important to this community. Having a conversation with them about looking at a reduction in services, very hard. When you think about senior centers, those are very important in our community. Having a conversation with seniors as to why they may have to go to Mary Esther Gonzalez and they can't go to, what's the one by Consuelo, right, is a hard conversation to have, because that connection of where we are today versus what it's costing us to deliver is, it's one, it's hard to consume, and then two, put up with. But that's really where they're looking to the council to provide some direction in terms of how much are you wanting, and then we have to figure out the right staffing levels to support it. Yes, sir. Sure. It's a very good component. I will just say on the film that there have been at least 3 independent studies that have been very conclusive that for every dollar that the state spends in the incentive back, so this is a state incentive, not a city, but for every dollar that the state spends, there's a $1.50 return in the community. So there is some pretty good evidence on that. Well, I think it's anecdotal for sure.
Is there a relationship?
Yeah.
Or is it just a situation where the state does nothing, they would still,
So the issue of the economy, the city needs to invest to grow the economy. We can't just sit back and think that it's gonna go ahead and take care of itself on its own. Place to invest, we'll be announcing this week gigabyte fiber, so making sure that broadband exists. The Economic Development Department puts money in the Santa Fe Business Incubator, about $200,000 a year, to make sure that there's a place for small businesses to get into and to be able to hopefully grow up inside. We put another $200,000 into workforce training for a lot of young kids that are disconnected from the system, so we can get them trained up and worked in. Those are all areas that when you think about a cost benefit, you're not necessarily looking at that $1 today means that we're gonna get $1 back in this fiscal year. This is more about making these investments so that over time we don't see these costs begin to go up. And I would argue the same on the film. But besides that issue, the cost benefit becomes more of a issue of how do you quantify the benefit of a police officer or a police force adequately staffed to lower the amount of property loss that occurs in a community? And some of that you have to set by benchmarks. How do you quantify the benefit if you have a full police force in lowering the number of violent crimes in a community? Same for your fire. Same for your senior services. If we're putting in $500,000 into senior services, how do you develop a cost benefit that comes back? Some of it is measured, the benefit is directly measured by the citizen engagement, where they say, yes, for the dollar that I'm giving you, I want to be able to go to a library, I want to be able to go to a senior center, I want to know that I'm not the only person who's spending money in this community, so there needs to be a healthy economy. I mean, those are some of the things that is the best way that I know how to answer that cost benefit per se, so that we can create some true measurement. But what we know now is that we're going in this cycle, right? We're spiraling down as opposed to flattening and then hopefully beginning to grow our economy this way. It's not to mention, when you look at the growth in poverty and hunger rates over the last 4 years in Santa Fe, those have actually grown, and in some years they've expanded faster than our economy has. Those are all areas that are 2,400 kids today are neither working nor are they in school. So that makes sense, sure. And being able to establish usage rates and are we, if we're spending X dollars on a rec center, right. Right, I understand that point, sure. That makes a lot of sense. So we can look at usage of different centers, whether they be recreation or senior, and determine, is it being fully utilized to its capacity or is it underperforming? That makes a lot of sense, and yes. Sure. I think then that will be a natural one that we'd have to go through. That's a great point. And I think that's the type of data that we'll have to elevate up so the public knows some of the decisions why we would be considering some of the decisions that we're making. Salvador Pettis is a classic example. Lots of deferred maintenance. That's where I learned how to swim. But you look at the usage numbers and it's very different from where it was at one point. It's gradually gone down. Expensive building to maintain, but it's an important service to the people that are using it, right? So looking at that, Fort Marcy is another example. To the folks in the north, they love Fort Marcy, and we all hear about it whenever something happens. Lowering that usage would be a definite impact. Here, the challenge with the Genoveva Chavez is that whether there's 2 people using it or 1,000 people using it, the costs are gonna be the same. There is no option turning the lights off on the Henneville Chavez because it's got lots of programs that are built into it that we just have to pay for. Right. So that's a very good point. Thanks for explaining it.
Other ideas come out of the box to generate revenue besides the, state, property tax, there's receipt
Yes.
tax.
Yep.
Obviously, like, the city has, I'm sure it probably has abandoned buildings and
Mhm.
buildings
Yep.
I can draw, maybe they belong to the state.
Yep. So the manager created the Office of Asset Development to take a look at all the city's assets to see what can be used in the private sector and generate revenues. The council approved a cell tower lease in a cell tower that already exists, so it's not gonna be hopefully controversial, but that'll generate about $5 million to the city over the course of about 20 years. We're identifying existing properties that we know we're not gonna be using, and that'll be submitted to the council to be able to put out to the private sector to put housing or to generate some kind of revenue that currently isn't existed. So there is a strategy to look at all of our assets that we own and see what we can do to start generating revenues on them. Right, and that will happen. Yes, sir. No, that's all right. You gave me a good idea on the last one, sir. No. And that's the biggest frustration, right? So
How recently has the state rebid its insurance, all those kinds of services,
So the insurance was just recently rebid, and that was, despite the fact that it is costing our employees more money, it actually was less. But let's just talk about right. So those are, yeah, we're self-insured, right? So, but let's talk about our cash management system. On any given day, the city has between $240 and $270 million. That's just moving its way through. We have a cash management system that's very conservative, i.e., we stick it in the mattress just in case we need it the next day. What that means is that what we're earning is about 0.004%. It's actually costing us money to keep the city deposits moving the way they are. Some of that's not so much bad policy as much as it is restrictions by the state and what you can actually do with that money, right? They require us to be in banks that will collateralize our debt by more than 100%, right? So when that happens, we earn very, very little money, right? So it's a tough issue that we're dealing with, but I think the issue of where we're self-insured, but on some of the other areas where we can bid large contracts out to try and lower some of the costs there. You know, I'm assuming that we'd have a practice that would. So if we do it net, if they pay early.
no, I don't believe we do anything
It's going to be very hard to do. And I will tell you that we have some, P&M is a classic example. There was probably about 5 months that we hadn't paid our bill. And they've been pretty good because we're big, they know we're good for it. The problem is the number of meters that we have throughout the city, how it's getting into the billing system, and then how we're turning it around. And I didn't worry about P&M as much as I worried about the small businesses, right, that actually do business with the city, and what's the turnaround time for us to get them paid, which is critical that we have to deal with. You don't have to be done. We could definitely set time to hear you out too. We will. I think that's going to be part of a natural system. I think that there's going to be there's a heightened concern across the city in terms of how we're going to shake out the FTE program. And right. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. I think once we clarify what that FTE program will look like, it'll be a lot easier for employees to stay participating. Yeah. Doing a bonus. Which one? Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. That is an area that I haven't seen rise, but I think you're right. I mean, some of it is in how we invest in the workplace and the training. Well, at least in our police and our fire, for sure.
I would suggest based on the typical, 29 divided, 17 employees, and I had to guess you probably doing $5, $6, $7 million a year.
Wow. Yeah, we'll definitely go back and look at that. Well, look, I appreciate the time tonight. All of us are available individually, or we have another one on the 15th. Despite the amount of deficit, I am optimistic that there is alignment by all the governing body on what we need to do to try and get through this. But it's enhanced when we have more participation like tonight. I think you brought some great points on how we can, especially to the public, justify what's going to stay open maybe and what closes by looking at usage numbers and making sure we can create that value associated with that. I think being able to look at services like deferred comp and seeing are we dealing with our services in the most efficient way as possible. I mean, we're leaving here tonight with a number of good ideas that we can go through. And the more people that could come out and kind of listen and then offer input, I think helps us quite a bit in being able to bring some good thinking to the table. So hopefully we'll see something after the first of the year, and then people can really start crunching on and seeing what makes sense. But it means a lot that you guys came out on a Monday night. Is this Monday? Monday night. It's been a working weekend on a Monday night, and we appreciate your participation in what we're doing. And Mike, you can't back out. You're in to go.